Hi guys, welcome back to LTF1. I'm back with Jack at Borat on Twitter, if you want to follow him. And we're going to be talking today about the Austrian GP. It was a better race than last week, the last of our triple header. And yeah, today, I mean, there's more penalties today than probably Euro 2020. So,
yeah, very interesting race this week. It seemed a lot more happened than the last race here last week, didn't it? I think going to the two-stopper generally throws a bit more into the mix generally, doesn't it? But like you said, with penalties, I think that's going to be our main talking point off the hop, isn't it? We had Norris initially given the first penalty for his defence on Perez.
yeah,
Was it? So, and then there was I think Perez then also caught a couple of penalties later on. Was it two that he got?
Yeah, it was 2 5-second penalties, both on Charles Leclerc.
Yeah. Some not very family-friendly radio messages between Charles and his engineer as well. Did you catch those?
Yeah.
Didn't sound like a happy man.
No. I've seen a few people talking about Charles Leclerc last week with his getting away with ruining a couple of people's races through a bit of, I'm going to be careful with my wording here, I don't want to call it carelessness last week, but it kind of was.
It was.
But carelessness, let's just say carelessness. Yeah. And there was a few people calling it cosmic karma for last week, which might seem a bit harsh, but yeah.
It was like you said, last week was very careless of Charles. It was like he went wide out of turn one, and in his mind you could see it in the way he was driving. He was just panicking, thinking, I need to get back to where I was. I need to kind of make the best of this and not lose too much track position. And he just did it at the expense of all others around him, ruined Gasly's race. And like you said, I think, karma definitely came back around this week for him, didn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, some of the penalty points are a bit, I don't know, they're a bit controversial today, especially Lando Norris. I felt bad for him because I don't think, and I think most people agree with me on this, he really didn't deserve the 5-second penalty today, because he, from what I remember, he was already in front of Checo Perez. It was turn 4, I believe. And Perez was trying to make a move around the outside and just sort of went too wide, I guess, and then ended up on the gravel. Yeah,
and is that really Lando's fault either? I mean, at the end of the day, they're in Formula One. They're racing in the most prestigious racing series in the world. They fight their way up to this point, and what? Lando has to just give away the place, does he? Because Checo's decided he wants to go around the outside. It's just that's not how racing is. I think Checo had plenty of time and space to get out of that to avoid going off onto the gravel if he wanted to, but he chose to stick it out, and he bore the consequences of that. But I like you said, I don't think Lando is at fault there, to be honest. But the precedent was set with this. I think maybe even the same turn with Hamilton and Albon, wasn't it, last year? Yeah. The 5-second penalty was given there. Ironically, Lando ended up being the one to benefit off of that with last lap Strat 7 speed, and he managed to get within the 5 seconds to Lewis, didn't he? And I think that was his first podium.
Yeah, it was. I remember that. But yeah, I was looking at Norris's onboard today with the incident with Perez, and it looked as, from his onboard, it looked as if he wasn't pushing Perez out wide. He wasn't leaving him no room. He looked as if that he was just following the sort of racing line and essentially just turning the corner, whereas it was on Perez, as you sort of said before, it was on Perez. He decided to try and make the move stick around the corner rather than just backing off a bit and then pushing again. So
and that's where the better racers of for want of a better term, the races among them. So do you remember Leclerc, Hamilton, Monza 2019? I think Leclerc did pretty much the same thing to Hamilton. Hamilton came off, took the escape road, and lived to fight another day, so to speak. It's knowing when to pull out of those situations and live to fight another day. Whereas what Perez did, he was so intent on trying to get past Lando there that he went off onto the gravel. I think he dropped down to 9th or 10th place off of it, didn't he? And then his whole race was a recovery drive after that.
Yeah.
So it's knowing when to fight your battles, and he could have maybe waited maybe a couple of laps, and he might have been able to make that move somewhere else on the track without as much risk.
Yeah, because at that time I think it was a battle for P2, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a battle for P2. So if he had just backed off a bit, he still would have easily, with a Red Bull car, has much more pace than both Hamilton and Bottas this year, most likely. And yeah, he could have easily stuck it out and made a move later on, but I couldn't see the sense in giving Lando a penalty for that.
And to then go on further into the race and to do the exact same thing to Leclerc twice. Was it twice or was it more than that? They were battling, they were duking it out for a good few laps, weren't they? And I guess you could say the same thing about Leclerc, is you need to know when to stick your nose in there and when to not. But he wasn't very happy with what Perez did. Consequently, touching on the Norris penalty, he's actually now only 2 penalty points away from a race ban. I didn't check when, because I think it's done by rolling calendar year that the points then drop off from the previous year. I don't know when they start dropping off from the points that he accrued last year, but yeah, you don't want that hanging over you. So hopefully he doesn't get any more of those.
Yeah. Who's McLaren's reserve driver for this year? I can't remember.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I never really thought about it, to be honest, because it's never sort of been a big, I guess, concern recently. But yeah.
No.
But yeah, there was more penalties. Checo Perez twice, then Yuki Tsunoda twice.
Yeah. Helmut Marko's not going to be very happy with him, is he? Because that was 2 for the exact same reason, I think.
Yeah.
Going over the white line, coming into the pit entry, wasn't it?
Yeah, twice.
That seems a bit of like an easily avoidable mistake.
Yeah, you'd think, just sort of generally with an experience of racing, you'd sort of know, even if you did that the first time as a mistake, the second time it's just, I don't know, it seems like a really amateur mistake to make twice in a race.
Yeah, it does. George Russell, he did amazing in qualifying yesterday. Absolutely astonishing job to drag that car, get the absolute most out of it that you can possibly get. And that's how I look at these things. I know a lot of people will say he's out driving the car and he's taking it to places it shouldn't be. And that's not really possible, is it? I mean, the car has, say a car has an amount of potential, and some cars are easier or harder to extract all of that potential. And I think George is one of the best drivers in Formula One at the moment. He is able to extract nigh on as much of that car's potential as it has, and that got him this week up to P9 in qualifying, and then P8 with the penalty that was given to Seb. Whereas Latifi's not able to extract not very much of the potential out of the car, and you'd like to think with maybe Latifi is kind of, he's okay, but he's had a couple of years in that seat now. You'd like to think that maybe another driver in that Williams, you might see it maybe in Q2 with both cars every week. It's hard to tell, isn't it? How much of it is the car, how much of it is George?
Yeah, because obviously George is very quick.
Yeah.
And as you say about Latifi, I think Latifi should be looking over his shoulder at the minute, because there's loads of good drivers in F2 at the minute. There's going to be drivers without a contract next season. So I think the potential for Latifi to be replaced and Williams to try and get 2 new, not better, but drivers that are going to be more competitive. So
yeah,
I can't sort of put my finger on what Latifi's lacking at the minute, but there's just some sort of X factor that he's missing, and George Russell just seems to have that.
Yeah, he definitely does. I think with Latifi as well, when the team was owned by the Williams family, they were cash strapped. They needed a pay driver, for want of a better term, which Latifi very much is.
Yeah.
He's from a very wealthy Canadian family. I think they own Lavazza Coffee. Is that how you say it? Lavazza?
Yeah.
Anyway, so they needed the money. He wanted an F1 seat. That worked fine for them then. But now there's contract. I believe is his contract coming to the end this year? Either way, Williams don't need that money anymore. They've got a lot of investment from Doralton Capital. Plenty of investment from them. They don't need a second driver now that's just there for money. They need two drivers that are going to be able to extract the potential out of the car. So I think you're right in saying we probably won't see Latifi in Formula One much past this year, if this is his last contract year. But it'd be interesting to see who Williams do go for. I think Valtteri Bottas, manager, was seen speaking with Jos Capito yesterday, so they might be looking at a swap there for George. What do you think?
Yeah, I could see it happening. I'd feel a bit, I don't know, I'd feel a bit undersold if I was Bottas, because he's had like nearly 4 years now at Mercedes where he's been in and around podium spots, and then to sort of end up at Williams the next year when you're not, well, is he out of his prime? He shows, the thing with Bottas, he shows glimpses of being in his prime, but then he goes through like a phase of looking like he doesn't belong in F1. So
he is very much affected by confidence. Out of all the drivers on the grid, he definitely is one that very obviously is affected by things that are going on around him, whether it's people talking about the security of his seat or talking about his last performance if it wasn't very good. He is a sensitive guy, and there's nothing wrong with that, but what he needs is a team that wants him and that treats him as a number one, as their main guy. And you never know, Williams might come out of the gates next year with a car that's maybe second or third fastest out of all of them, with the big rule change. And there could be a complete mix-up of the field next year, so it might not be the worst move for him going, really.
Yeah, because Williams this year even, they look stronger and more competitive than definitely last year. So I think they're on a positive sort of gradient at the minute, and yeah, who knows, next year they could be competing for more than just points, who knows.
Yeah. So he'd go there as a team leader. He would have perhaps an F2 driver come up for the second seat. I think he'd be in an environment that he thrives in. If you remember when he was in Williams prior to Mercedes, he looked great. Yeah,
and as you say, if the team's sort of more centered around him, I think it'll do a lot for his confidence and his racing too. And in terms of F2 driver, his name I can't remember off the top of my head. They've had him in P1, FP1 for George Russell for the last 2 weeks.
Roy Nissany.
Nissany, his name just won't come to me for some reason. But yeah, it looks like they could be warming him up for George's seat next year.
Yeah, potentially. I think he's another similar to. I think Roy Nissany's contract is another money contract. I think he's from a very wealthy family in Israel, and he's not completely out of place in F2. I think he can have competitive weekends, and then he can completely fall off the radar again the next week. It's the consistency that I think is lacking for Roy, but he's in the mix. He knows the car. He knows the team from these 3 practice sessions that he's been a part of. So yeah, he's got as much shout as anyone, I think.
Yeah. So talking about next week, well, not next week. It's how many weeks now? I've lost track of date. In a couple of weeks, we're at Silverstone. I'm going to be there. Akshar's also going to be there, and it's going to be a big one because, it's going to be massive for Lewis Hamilton. But I think, in my opinion, if Verstappen wins there comfortably, like I think he has the potential to, I think he's started running away with the championship now. What do you think?
I think he's already running away with the championship at this point. Yeah. After today, he's more than a full race win ahead of Lewis. He could DNF Silverstone and still be first in the Drivers' Championship. The top 5 drivers at the moment, you've got Verstappen with 182 points.
Yeah.
Lewis is next with 150.
Yeah.
Then Perez, 104. Norris, 101. And Bottas with 92. So you've got to think. So the constructors as well, you've got Red Bull obviously first with 286, Mercedes with 242, McLaren with 141. So of McLaren's 141 points, Norris is 101 of those points. Imagine if they had 2 drivers putting out consistent results like Lando is. Mercedes might have some trouble even with their second place in the constructors this year.
Yeah. Because you can only think if Danny Ricciardo manages to find his form for the sort of second half of this season, even that could start to provide a bit of a threat to Mercedes.
Yeah,
because
it really could.
Mercedes look like they're slowing down, and McLaren look like they're just getting faster every week.
Yeah, McLaren aren't taking their foot off the gas, for want of a better term. They're clearly developing that car, and they're extracting everything out of it they can. Like you could see that today on all the straights, that McLaren was very hard to overtake.
Yeah.
That's why Perez was going for the kind of Hail Mary overtakes wherever he could, because he knew he couldn't get it anywhere else.
And I think maybe I think it was lap 17 or 18. Lewis Hamilton said over the radio, he's commenting on Lando, it's very hard to follow the car, McLaren. So, yeah. And Danny Ricciardo, I think he had a really good race today. Went under the radar a bit. I tweeted about it earlier.
Yeah.
That his race went sort of under the radar, but I thought he had a very solid race today. He ended up P6, I believe.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? Great recovery drive from where he qualified. I think he qualified 13th. Was it 13th? Yeah.
It was 13th, yeah.
So to qualify 13th and then end up in P5, 6, sorry. It's great work by him. He just needs to sort the qualifying out. That's all it is with him. Lando's had 3 years in that car now to get used to it, to work out all of its limits and how to extract the best from it. I think I read something yesterday which was an explanation on how Lando was able to get so much out of the car. So he was using the sausage curbs out of some of the, I think, out of turn 1. And maybe another turn as well, maybe into the final turn as well. He was using them to straighten the car up and get on the power quicker.
Yeah.
He was almost slightly oversteering, then catching onto the sausage curb and using it to almost catapult him off onto the straight. It's little tricks like that you can only do when you really understand exactly what the car is going to do when you're asking for the maximum amount of it. If you're not fully confident in the car, you can't go chucking it around with reckless abandon like that. Whereas in race trim, in race pace, Danny's not far off at all. It's just about learning the car and really being able to do it in your sleep, which is where Lando is at the moment. Yeah,
because as I think I've probably said in a few videos, Lando looks so comfortable and so confident in that car. He really does. Because I've seen a lot of people saying, and I do agree, is that maybe 2023, 2024, he has a potential to be fighting for Constructors' Championship, not Driver Championship, sorry.
Well, I think McLaren have done amazing to lock him down for the next couple of years when they did.
Yeah.
Imagine if he wasn't locked down in a 3-year contract. I think it's 3 years, 2 or 3 year contract.
Yeah.
He would be well on Mercedes' radar right now. He would be seriously in contention for that seat. You'd have to think he would be.
Yeah, for definite.
He's also, what he's done is it's shown what a great driver Sainz is as well, because him and Sainz were right there with each other basically every race last year and the year before as well. There wasn't really much splitting them, and this year you can see how far Lando is ahead of Daniel Ricciardo. I think, if anything, it's almost kind of by proxy. It's singing Carlos Sainz's praises too, and the Sainz can then go into Ferrari and immediately hang out with Leclerc and hold it to him as well. I think we've got a really talented bunch of young drivers coming through at the moment. It's exciting to see where they're going to go.
Yeah, for definite, because this year especially, it's been so close in the qualifyings. Like I think there was like less than a second between something like first and sixth last week.
I think like yesterday at one point there was half a second between 1 and 15th place in one of the qualifying sessions.
Yeah,
it was insane how close the cars are now to performing to each other. And yeah, it's always the way. I think we mentioned in our last video, the rule change comes along, always seems to happen at the wrong time, doesn't it? It's kind of put into place when the current rule set doesn't look like it's producing great racing, and in the years leading up to the rule change, people finally get their act together and develop the best cars they can, and then it's all going to change again. But hopefully this new rule set will shuffle the pack. You might get maybe Alpine further up to the front, and like we said, Williams as well. That's what it enables. It enables a new team to potentially find a trick that no one else has found, like the classic double diffuser for Brawn in 2009.
Yeah,
maybe some team will find a little loophole like that, but yeah, it's going to split the pack up again and take a little while for them to find parity again.
Yeah, it'll just be his luck if next season Mercedes end up with like the 6th or 7th fastest car on the grid, and Williams end up with like 1st or 2nd.
Well, I was thinking that with George, all this discussion about George and everyone talking about that Mercedes seat like it's the only way to go, and that's what anyone in Formula One wants. And I suppose up until this year, it has been the gold standard Formula One car.
Yeah.
But there's nothing there to say that next year that car will be at the front. There's every chance that Red Bull, McLaren, Williams might be faster than it, and all George has done is fought tooth and nail to get into a car that's not even competitive, potentially.
Yeah, because I see Mercedes hyping next season up a lot already, saying, we're preparing our car for next season, we're already developing it. As if, that means they're going to be nailed on as like the best car next season.
Exactly.
I've seen Haas saying the same thing, so
yeah.
What's to say Haas can have the best car next season?
That's it. Everyone's developing their car for next year as well. There's not one team on the grid that's not ploughing development hours into next year's car. So you've got a season on your hand this year, Mercedes, and you need to get on with it, because I saw last week, I don't know if you caught it, Toto Wolff. I think Toto Wolff said something, and then James Allison completely contradicted him. Toto Wolff saying that they're not developing the car again this year, and then I think the next day on the F1 Nation podcast, I think it was James Allison that was interviewed on there, and he said no, they have got updates coming, they'll be there for Silverstone. So I think power unit upgrade, the classic reliability, they're calling it a reliability upgrade because that gives them the loophole they need to make a change to the power unit, because they're going to be locked. But yeah, no, I think they are putting some developments on the car, but they're not going to magically find half a second or whatever they need to get in front of Red Bull. It's only going to take them a little bit closer to them, and Red Bull are still developing too. So
because I agree. There's nothing to say that Mercedes next year is going to be any better, or even further in the season they're going to be better.
No.
So I don't think it's as clear cut as George Russell joins Mercedes, points every week, podiums, the whole lot.
Yeah.
I think, as silly as it sounds, even considering waiting a bit, because they're claiming, there's been a lot of people claiming, and it's only getting louder, that he's going to be announced as Mercedes' second or as their other driver for next season by Silverstone.
Yeah.
But if I were in his position personally, I would hold on a bit later in the season, because and see how Williams could potentially be looking for next season, if there's any indication of how good their car might be.
Well, I think you're right.
Rather than jumping straight for the Mercedes seat just because they've been historically good with in the current set of regulations.
I think you're right. I think the longer it goes, where he's almost being messed around by Toto and not being told his future, the longer he stays in that Williams and they keep progressing further up the field as well with their developments that are clearly working wonders for them, it might not be the worst place for him to be going into a completely new set of rules and regulations.
Because he's going to have to, next year, the cars are going to be completely different.
Yeah, completely different to how they are now. So a complete 180 from the type of downforce that's used at the moment.
Yeah. And every driver is going to have to be able to try and find that pace again, even if they're used to the car or they're used to being in that team. So going to a whole new team where he's going to be expected, he's going to have, I guess, not higher standards, but a higher expectation of him than Bottas, because he's the man he's replacing.
Yeah.
Then to come into a whole new team with whole new regulations and to be fighting like constantly for first or second every week, I think it's going to be too much of a challenge at first.
I think that's why he almost doesn't seem too worried about it as well. Every time he's asked about it at the moment, the kind of canned answer he's giving, which is fair enough, is he's saying basically, whichever team I end up in next year, I know I'm going to have a Mercedes power unit behind me, and he is. Power unit is great. It is up there with Honda, isn't it, as the best on the grid. But I mean, if he's in Williams still, he's got just as much of a shot as Mercedes have potentially next year. Like we said, no one knows where the teams are going to end up in comparison to each other.
Yeah.
So moving forward to Silverstone, 2 weeks' time, how do you feel that race is going to pan out? After seeing the leaps the Red Bull have made in performance over the last 3 races, they've made a definite leap in power, haven't they? So how do you feel that will play out? Qualifying first, and then I guess the race.
Qualifying, I think Mercedes are really going to give it everything they have and completely go all out. I think to start the race, the top 3, I think I think Verstappen will take pole.
Yeah.
Because he's just too good at the minute and the car's too good. I'm going to say Hamilton P2 and Perez P3. That's my prediction.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think Mercedes are going to want to put on a show at Silverstone. It's the team's home race.
Yeah.
I don't know what the state is on their power unit usage at the moment, whether they're on older ones or if they've worked out that they get to fit new ones for Silverstone. Because I don't know what their allocation is. Is it 3 per season or 4? Either way, I wonder if they'll turn they get all the Mercedes power unit cars engines turned up for Silverstone to put on that show.
Yeah.
Theory, who knows?
Yeah. So, what's your qualifying prediction then, Silverstone?
It's a very, very power sensitive track, isn't it? It's just long straight after long straight, and I think after the leaps we've seen Red Bull take the last couple of races, I do think it'll be a Red Bull pole. I think it'll be a Max Verstappen pole. I think Lewis Hamilton is going to be up there. I also think Lando Norris could probably put it in 3rd or maybe even 2nd in that McLaren, because it's shown to have the highest top speed of any of the other cars. They've magically somehow worked their aerodynamics into such a way where they can get the downforce they need to run the corners the way they do, but they can also hang out very high top speed too. So I think McLaren are going to have a great time at Silverstone. I think it's a track that feels like it will suit Danny Rick a bit better as well, because there's a lot of runoff, similar to Paul Ricard. In places anyway. There's not all around, but you know what I mean. It's going to be interesting whatever happens, but Silverstone's always an electric atmosphere. I'm very jealous that I'm not going with you. I saw when the tickets went up, they're unusually cheap for Silverstone. remember looking at ticket prices there a couple of years ago. My eyes water. Cost of them.
Yeah, this is going to be my first ever proper race that I've been to. I'm going with my cousin. He went to Silverstone for qualifying a couple of years ago.
Oh, cool.
Might have been 4 years ago, but yeah. So, what are your predictions for the race then? How the race will pan out?
I think it'll be similar to what we saw today at Austria, to be honest, because I know that the track length is very different between Austria and Silverstone, but the composition of corners and straights is kind of similar. It's a lot of long straights, a lot of high speed, long radius corners. I think it's going to be Red Bull and McLaren up front. I think Mercedes over a race stint, I think they're going to struggle. I'd be interested to see what if we get any issues with tyres as well.
Yeah,
I didn't see what. I don't think they've said what hardness of tyres they're going with, have they, Pirelli? Yeah, but I know that last year in the first race there was a lot of blowouts, wasn't there? And then in the second, I think they went a step harder, or was it softer on the tyres? They changed between the two races.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see what happens there. Yeah.
What are you going to say for who finishes on the podium next week?
Who's on the podium?
Next race, I mean.
Next race. Verstappen, I think Norris, and Lewis. Yeah. Not necessarily in that order. I think Lewis and Lando could end up duking it out between themselves. But Lando is hot. He's hot at the moment. He's fast, confident. There's no reason why he can't roll that over into Silverstone. Yeah, I agree. To be honest, my bold prediction for Silverstone is that with the way that Mercedes have looked for pace, like today they looked slow. I'm gonna have a bold prediction and say I can see a Mercedes P4 and 5 at the end. Yeah, that is perfectly within the realms of possibility. I think a couple of more laps on the end of today, and I think Bottas would have been done by Lando.
Yeah, because
Lewis was out of the picture completely at that point as well. If
Lando hadn't got that penalty, I believe he would have been P2.
He would have.
So if it was a poor decision to give him the 5-second penalty, he should have really had that P2. And as you say, because to be honest, I sort of overlooked him thinking about next week. But it's a good point. I think he could easily challenge for a podium next week.
Yeah.
Next race. I keep saying next week because
we're so used to them being so quick fire one after the other, aren't we?
Yeah, this triple header's messed in my head a bit.
So we've got 2 weeks till Silverstone, and then it's summer break after that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's a month of what are we going to do?
The first 3-week break after the first race in Bahrain was bad enough.
I know, that was awful. Why would they do that? Hype everyone up and then leave them hanging again.
Yeah. But so
trying to see if I've got anything left on my notes that we didn't talk about. No. But, no, I did. So I noticed that when Bottas and Hamilton had both pitted and they were on their new tyres, Lewis, I think, radioed in to Bono and said he mentioned, did he say his tyres were gone, or that I know that's his classic thing to say.
He does that every week.
But he had damage, didn't he? I think from riding the turn 1 sausage curb too hard.
Yeah.
And the damage that he had was really affecting his aero, and Bottas basically caught him up really quickly. And initially, the team were telling Bottas that he wasn't permitted to race Lewis. Yeah. Then it lasted 1 or 2 laps, and then they came back to him and told him, okay, we're going to switch the cars at whatever, I think they said turn 1, but they didn't end up switching there. It happened up at turn 3 in the race in the end. But fair play to Valtteri there. He didn't just go for it and overtake Lewis anyway. He did hold off and show that he is a team player in that sense.
Yeah.
And I think for me that's quite telling. It shows that he is being mindful of what he's conveying to other teams up and down the paddock. They don't want someone that's not going to listen to them, because wasn't really a team order as such, but it was more of like this is a bigger picture for the championship, isn't it? And in the end, it didn't matter anyway because Bottas went ahead of Lewis and then up into P2. But I think it was quite telling that he listened to the team and he didn't just go for it like with Spain when he nearly drove Lewis off the road. That was the last point I wanted to make. Yeah,
because I think they wouldn't have been able to keep Bottas behind Hamilton for too much longer anyway, because his pace was just much better. Hamilton was dropping back anyway, so he was always. It would have affected the team even more if they'd kept on with the, you can't race him. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this week's race, what would you rate it out of 10?
Well, I'll start with last week's race. So last week's race, considering it's the exact same 20 drivers, same track as this week, I think last week it was affected by not having as many fans as were there this week. The atmosphere this week was clearly way better than last week. Last week I would probably say a 6 out of 10. And this week I would probably give it like a 7.5 or an 8 out of 10. It seemed like a lot more was going on, especially in the upper midfield. That's where the real race was today, and that's where everyone, including my interest, was. It was very exciting for that. And poor old George, hanging on to that P10 until right near the end, and Alonso had to take it from him, didn't he?
As most people have been, I'm a big fan of George Russell.
Yeah.
I really wanted him to hold on, but it was just, I think it was turn 4 again. He just couldn't, it was just as he was coming out of the DRS zone, that Alonso just had so much more pace than him.
Yeah.
And the whole sort of 2 or 3 laps before, he was really fighting for his life.
He really was. It was an amazing defense he put up.
Yeah.
And that was made all the more obvious by as soon as Alonso got ahead of George, he was off. He was gone down the road, seconds ahead after a couple of laps. And that's how much faster that Alpine was. And George was still keeping him behind for lap after lap.
So I think it was like 3.5 or maybe even 4 seconds that he ended up in front of Virgil. So for me, last week, a bit of a snooze fest. I'll give it a 5 out of 10.
Oh, harsh. No, I think far off.
This week was much more visually interesting, as well as, just generally more interesting. There was much more going on, as you said.
Yeah.
It was much more interesting to watch. And I'd probably give it a 7 or 7.5 out of 10.
Nice. Very nice. Well, thanks for dropping by, everyone who's watched the video on. So this is on LTF1 official on YouTube. You search for that, you'll find it at the top of the suggestions. It's also going to be released in audio form on the Overcut podcasts, which you can find on all good podcast sites. I'm Jack, and I've been here with Ishan today. Do you want to say anything else, mate? Anything extra to get in there? Oh yeah, I'm at Borat on Twitter. Got to get that in there.
Yeah, so obviously if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to follow us on Twitter at LTF1 Official and Instagram at LTF1 Official. As Jack just said, you can find him on Twitter at Borat. And thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.